In World War II, fear usually had a sound. Sometimes it was the distant rumble of tanks. Sometimes the scream of artillery tearing the sky apart. But on certain battlefields, fear came quietly. No engines, no explosions, just a sharp metallic click, followed by chaos. For many German soldiers, that sound meant only one thing. An American shotgun. Not a machine gun. Not a sniper rifle. Not even a flamethrower. A shotgun. To modern ears, that sounds almost ridiculous. Shotguns are often seen as hunting weapons, home defense tools, or something you'd expect in a rural barn, not on the front lines of the deadliest war in human history. And yet, German forces didn't just dislike American shotguns. They feared them. Some hated them so deeply that Germany formally protested their use, calling them brutal, even illegal. An American soldier could pull the trigger once and send a storm of steel down a narrow path. Even if the first shot didn't kill, it stunned, wounded, or forced immediate retreat. Psychologically, it was devastating. German veterans later described the shock of seeing comrades fall instantly, without warning, without time to react. There was no aiming duel, no chance to dive for cover, just sudden violence. And then there was the sound. Anyone who has heard a pumped shotgun knows it. That unmistakable chchkk, as a new shell is chambered. In the chaos of battle, that sound carried. German soldiers learned to associate it with immediate danger. Some accounts suggest that merely hearing it caused panic in confined areas like bunkers and trenches. It wasn't just fear of death. It was fear of how fast death could arrive. Germany's reaction to American shotguns wasn't limited to battlefield complaints. During World War I, Germany had already protested their use, calling them inhumane. In World War II, those feelings returned. German officials argued that shotgun wounds were excessively brutal. Multiple entry wounds, massive tissue damage, hard-to-treat injuries. The irony, of course, was striking. This was a war filled with machine guns, flamethrowers, poison gas history, and mass bombings. Yet shotguns crossed a psychological line. Why? Because they were personal. A flamethrower burned from a distance. Artillery killed anonymously. Bombs fell from the sky. But shotguns were used face-to-face. You knew exactly who fired, and you saw exactly what happened. American troops, especially Marines and infantry units, quickly realized the power they held. Shotguns became favored weapons for patrols, room clearing, bunker assaults, and jungle fighting. In the Pacific, against Japanese forces, shotguns were equally feared, but in Europe, the reaction from German troops was uniquely intense. Because German doctrine wasn't built for sudden, overwhelming close-range chaos. And chaos is exactly what the shotgun delivered. By late World War II, many German soldiers adapted. They used grenades more aggressively. They avoided narrow approaches when Americans were suspected nearby. They listened carefully, because survival sometimes depended on recognizing that sound early enough to run. Or surrender. Yes, surrender. There are recorded cases where German soldiers gave up rather than face shotgun-armed American troops in confined spaces. Not because Americans were cruel, but because the weapon left no room for hesitation. This is only the beginning of the story, because the fear of American shotguns didn't come just from their firepower. It came from how American soldiers used them. Aggressively, decisively, without warning. In Part 2, we'll go deeper into specific battles, veteran accounts, and why shotguns symbolize something far larger than a weapon to German forces. By 1944, German soldiers on the Western Front had learned a hard lesson. The Americans did not fight the way they expected. German military doctrine was built on structure, clear lines, coordinated movement, fire discipline. Soldiers were trained to engage at distance, suppress the enemy, advance methodically. But American infantry brought something different into the fight: aggression. And nowhere was that aggression more obvious than in close combat. American units didn't wait for perfect conditions. They pushed forward, cleared ground fast, and forced encounters at ranges where German advantages disappeared. Shotguns became the spearhead of that mindset. In Normandy, the hedgerows turned France into a green labyrinth. Tall earthen walls, thick vegetation, narrow paths. Every corner was a potential ambush. Visibility dropped to just a few feet. Tanks struggled. Artillery was less effective. Command and control broke down. It became a soldier's war. Small units, split-second decisions, This was the environment where the shotgun truly earned its reputation. German soldiers advancing through hedgerows often did so cautiously, rifles raised, fingers tense on triggers. Then it happened. A sudden blast. At close range, shotgun pellets didn't just wound, they overwhelmed. Helmets dented, gear shattered, bodies dropped instantly. Unlike rifles, shotguns didn't require precision under stress. One pull of the trigger covered an entire narrow opening. For German soldiers, this created a sense of helplessness. Training didn't prepare them for that kind of sudden, brutal contact. American infantry squads often assigned a specific role to the shotgunner. He went first. When clearing a trench, bunker, or farmhouse, the shotgunner led the way. The logic was simple. If an enemy appeared suddenly, the shotgun gave the highest chance of immediate neutralization. Veterans recalled that shotgunners were both respected and feared, even by their own side. Respected because they saved lives. Feared because everyone knew what happened when they fired. German accounts from the Western Front described shotgun encounters as chaotic and terrifying. One former Wehrmacht infantryman later recalled advancing into what he thought was an abandoned trench. Suddenly, an American appeared just meters away. There was no exchange of fire, no warning, just one deafening blast. The soldier next to him collapsed instantly. Another screamed. The trench was lost in seconds. Encounters like this spread fear faster than any propaganda. Stories moved through units. Warnings were passed quietly. If you hear it, run. The psychological impact of American shotguns went far beyond casualties. They broke morale. German soldiers began hesitating before entering confined spaces. They delayed assaults. They avoided certain terrain altogether. In war, hesitation is deadly. American commanders understood this effect, even if they didn't always articulate it. Shotguns weren't just weapons. They were psychological tools. There was also the matter of wounds. Shotgun injuries were different from rifle wounds. Multiple pellet impacts caused complex trauma. Medics struggled to treat them quickly. Infection was common. Survivability was lower. German medical personnel reportedly dreaded shotgun casualties, not because they were illegal, but because they were difficult, painful, and often fatal. This fed into the perception that shotguns were cruel, excessive, and somehow outside the rules of war. But war does not reward fairness. It rewards effectiveness. Despite German complaints, American command saw no reason to restrict shotguns. They were legal, they were effective, and most importantly, they saved American lives. From the American perspective, the logic was brutal but simple. If a shotgun cleared a bunker faster than a rifle, then it reduced friendly casualties. If it terrified the enemy, even better. German propaganda tried to frame American shotguns as barbaric. But privately, German officers understood the truth. They worked, and they worked frighteningly well. Some German units attempted countermeasures. Grenades were used more aggressively. Automatic weapons were kept ready in close spaces. But even then, the advantage often stayed with the shotgunner, because speed mattered more than volume of fire. One blast, one moment, and the fight was over. As the Allies pushed deeper into Europe, urban combat intensified. Cities like Aachen turned into ruins. Fighting moved indoors, stairwells, basements, hallways. Shotguns excelled here. German soldiers hiding behind doors or around corners had little chance to react. Shotgun blasts filled rooms instantly. Veterans later described how clearing a building with a shotgun felt like holding overwhelming power. For the Germans on the receiving end, it felt like sudden annihilation. It's important to understand something here. German fear of American shotguns was not irrational. It was learned. Every battlefield lesson was paid for in blood. When German soldiers feared a weapon, it was because it had proven itself. Again, and again, and again. By late 1944, many German soldiers preferred surrender to close-quarters fights with Americans. This wasn't cowardice. It was survival. They knew that once Americans closed the distance, the odds turned sharply against them. And the shotgun symbolized that reality. But the real secret behind the fear goes even deeper. Because it wasn't just about pellets or pump actions. It was about what the shotgun represented. American confidence, American aggression, American willingness to fight up close. To truly understand why American shotguns haunted German soldiers, you have to listen to the men who were there. Not generals, not politicians, but the infantrymen, the ones who fought in the mud, the smoke, and the silence between shots. For many of them, the memory of facing a shotgun never faded. Years after the war, German veterans often spoke about American infantry differently than they spoke about other enemies. They didn't describe them as elegant or precise. They described them as overwhelming. And the shotgun was central to that image. One German veteran recalled clearing a ruined farmhouse in France. His unit believed the Americans had withdrawn. The door opened. A figure moved. There was no warning shot. No shouted command. Just a blast that echoed through the building. The man next to him fell instantly. Another dropped his rifle and froze. The encounter was over before it began. What shocked him most wasn't just the speed, it was the certainty. American veterans remembered these encounters too, but from the opposite side. Shotgunners described a strange mix of responsibility and isolation. They were often placed at the front, expected to move first, expected to act decisively. They didn't fire often, but when they did, the result was final. Many admitted that after the first few uses, the fear shifted. The enemy became cautious, sometimes hesitant. Sometimes they didn't appear at all. In the U.S. Army and Marine Corps, shotguns weren't issued randomly. They were chosen deliberately for specific missions. Patrols, raids, night operations, clearing bunkers and trenches. Situations where surprise mattered more than accuracy. German troops, on the other hand, were trained for disciplined fire and controlled engagement. Shotguns broke that discipline. They forced instinctive reactions. An instinct under fire often leads to mistakes. One of the most powerful psychological effects of the shotgun was uncertainty. A rifle shot could come from far away. You might hear it. You might not. But you understood the danger. Shotguns created a different kind of fear. You didn't hear them until they were almost on top of you. By the time you recognized the sound, it was already too late. This uncertainty made German soldiers nervous in confined spaces. They checked corners twice. You didn't hear them until they were almost on top of you. By the time you recognized the sound, it was already too late. This uncertainty made German soldiers nervous in confined spaces. They checked corners twice. They moved slower. They hesitated. All advantages for the attacker. The fear also spread socially. Stories traveled faster than bullets. One bad encounter could shape the behavior of an entire platoon. German soldiers shared warnings quietly. Americans used shotguns. Don't rush trenches. Don't enter rooms blindly. These warnings were not orders. They were survival advice. Interestingly, American shotguns became symbols not just of violence, but of inevitability. Once Americans reached close range, German soldiers felt the fight was already lost. That sense of inevitability broke resistance. In warfare, morale collapses before armies do, and shotguns accelerated that collapse. There's another layer to this fear that's rarely discussed. Cultural difference. American soldiers often approached combat with a directness that shocked European forces. They didn't romanticize war. They wanted it over. Fast. The shotgun fit that mindset perfectly. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't subtle. It was brutally efficient. To German soldiers trained in structured warfare, this felt unpredictable. And unpredictability is terrifying. Some German officers reportedly warned their men specifically about American close assault tactics. Not because they were illegal, but because they worked. They advised using grenades first, maintaining distance at all costs, avoiding enclosed spaces where possible. In other words, avoid the shotgun. American shotguns also challenged traditional ideas of battlefield honor. There was no duel, no exchange, just action and consequence. This offended some German sensibilities and amplified resentment. But resentment doesn't stop pellets. As the war dragged on and Germany's position weakened, the fear deepened. Shotguns became associated with advancing Allied forces. Liberation for some, an end for others. When German soldiers heard that Americans were nearby, the image that came to mind was not a rifle line. It was close combat, sudden violence, and no escape. By the time the war reached Germany itself, this fear was fully ingrained. Urban fighting in German cities mirrored what had happened in France. Rooms, hallways, basements. By the later stages of World War II, fear of American shotguns had moved beyond the front lines. It reached German command structures, not in official manuals or training guides, but in the quiet warnings passed down through officers who had seen what happened up close. German leadership understood something important. They were not losing ground only because of numbers or firepower. They were losing because their soldiers were psychologically outmatched in close combat. And the shotgun was a symbol of that imbalance. German officers began adjusting tactics where they could. Orders emphasized maintaining distance, avoiding confined spaces unless absolutely necessary, using grenades first, always. The idea was simple. If you couldn't see the enemy, assume a shotgun was waiting. But these adjustments came too late. The battlefield had already changed. American infantry doctrine favored speed and aggression. This wasn't accidental. U.S. training emphasized initiative. Small unit leaders were encouraged to act independently. Soldiers were trusted to make decisions under pressure. Shotguns fit perfectly into this doctrine. They rewarded decisiveness. They punished hesitation. Interestingly, German fear of American shotguns persisted even when they were rarely used. The idea of the shotgun became more powerful than the weapon itself. Rumors exaggerated its effect. Stories grew darker. The weapon took on an almost mythic quality. In war, myths are powerful. They shape behavior. They influence decisions. And the myth of the American shotgun became a weapon of its own. This fear also exposed a deeper truth about World War II combat. Technology matters. Numbers matter. But psychology matters more. A weapon that terrifies the enemy can change the course of a battle without firing a single shot. Shotguns did that. They altered how German soldiers thought, how they moved, how they fought. German attempts to label shotguns as inhumane were ultimately expressions of frustration. They couldn't counter the weapon easily. They couldn't ban it. And they couldn't ignore its effect.